Hello. The chief antagonists that are trying to destroy the rediscovery of Noah's Ark comprise individuals that are associated with the PKK, or the Kurdistan Workers' Party, a Marxist revolutionary terrorist organization that is renowned for killing civilians, especially women and children, in order to destabilize the government of Turkey. Also, there are individuals that are trying to denigrate the Ark that have significant ties to the Yazidi community. These are the early brand of Satanists that worship a Melek Taus, or the peacock angel, that many in Islam, Christianity, and Judaism ascribe to the devil. Also, secularists and secular academics are very against Noah's Ark discovery, simply because it threatens their majority and dominance over Western thought. Secularism and atheism are totally in control of academia in the West. The fourth group that is trying to denigrate and destroy Noah's Ark has a history of animosity with the rediscoverer of Noah's Ark, namely Ahmet Ertuğrul. First, Randall Price. Randall not only allegedly was physically humiliated by Ahmet Ertuğrul in front of his son, but then Ahmet Ertuğrul took him to a place that was far away from Noah's Ark, and then allegedly stole up to $30,000 from Randall Price. But instead of taking his animosity out on Ahmet Ertuğrul, Randall Price has tried to destroy the archaeological site, Noah's Ark, and the artifactual assemblage in Noah's Ark. For example, at the very beginning, Randall Price said that artifacts were removed from Noah's Ark, and this was totally correct. But then he reversed course, and he said, oh, no, Noah's Ark represents a fraud, which enabled Ahmet Ertuğrul to remove more artifacts from the site. Now, these were all reported to the Turkish government, but this has caused a needless delay in terms of the protection, preservation, and research of Noah's Ark. The second individual is Richard Bright, or Dick Bright. And the reason is, many years ago, Dick and Ahmet Ertuğrul were allegedly accosted by Turkish Jandarma Militarisi, thinking that they were PKK, and they were fired upon. Dick Bright has resentment toward Ahmet Ertuğrul for nearly losing his life. But again, instead of taking out their animosity on Ahmet Ertuğrul, they've taken it out on this defenseless archaeological site, namely Noah's Ark. The third person that's involved in this, Don Patton. Don Patton is an individual that is said that he's friends with Randall and friends with Dick. As he said himself, he's going to do whatever they want him to do. But in this case, they're using him to destroy and denigrate a wonderful archaeological site. The fourth person that's involved is an individual named Murat Sahin. He was convicted and spent 10 years in prison for cutting off the ear of a disabled man, and then killing his father, and then shooting the jaw off another individual. And for this, he spent 10 years in a Turkish penitentiary. But again, instead of being very wary of this criminality, this group has been totally used by Murat Sahin to give him money to go on a wild goose chase around Greater Mount Ararat, being nowhere near the southern gorge, which is the actual location of Noah's Ark. And finally, you have a group of young Earth creationists that are very against this rediscovery and are trying to destroy the site because it interferes with their marketing of their replica arks. It threatens to expose some of their views and inaccuracies now that the real Ark has been rediscovered. As an archaeologist, the fact that Noah's Ark was largely unprotected put me and others in a difficult position, because if we expose their lies too much, These groups could hurt the archaeological site that was unprotected, steal artifacts from Noah's Ark, and exchange the artifacts for weapons to kill Turkish civilians and facilitate terrorism and a Marxist revolution within Turkey. But now the site is protected, and I and others are able to address the lies, false allegations, and misleading tactics these groups use and used to destroy and denigrate Noah's Ark. So all groups are working in conjunction and are offering 10 lies which are used to denigrate and destroy this precious archaeological site that represents not only Noah's Ark, a foundational belief in 3 world religions, namely Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but also represents the transition point between the end of the Stone Age or the Late Epipaleolithic. The site is from 13,100 to 9,600 BC, and the origin or the progenitor site of the Neolithic or the farming age, precisely the beginning of the pre-pottery Neolithic A period. Noah's Ark is located in the southern gorge of Greater Mount Ararat, between 3,900 and 4,700 meters above sea level, 4 to 11 meters under the surface of the gorge. It is 158 meters in length. It certainly is Noah's Ark. First of all, the interior is filled with cages for animals and also perches for the birds, anywhere from 20 centimeters in width to over 4 meters in width. There are thousands of cages for animals and also perches for the birds. And we know this from the non-skeletal remains, the feces, the hair, the fur, from every type of animal, mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and insects. There's thousands of animal tracks of every type of animal. Also in the interior of the barge, there's small habitations for very few humans. And one of the notable characteristics is all the furniture is adhered to the walls. There's no free-floating furniture. It's all attached to the walls, similar to modern barges or other vessels, to prevent the furniture from being a safety issue during rough seas. This archaeological site is covered on the exterior and on the interior with bitumen or petroleum-based pitch and also cypress sap, similar to early Neolithic vessels at the Kuwaiti site of As-Sabiya during the early Neolithic. Also, this site is definitely a maritime barge, in that the exterior of the hull angles inward to the central keel. Also, many walls angle inward toward the central keel. You also have the seafaring woods of Cupressa sempervirens, Mediterranean cypress, oak, and teak. Another example is that the site is built with the use of stone adzes. Also, in the maritime barge is 3 decks. Barnacles are found on the exterior of the hull. There's a lot of cross beams throughout the different elevations of the walls to keep the hull intact. Also, there's lots of evidence for maritime joinery, specifically coak-and-dowel or mortise-and-tenon joinery throughout the vessel. In addition, the barge has large cargo holds that are filled with early types of legumes, namely sisser, chickpea, pisum, pea, and Vicia urvilia, or bitter vetch, which is not common today, but was very common during the transition between the late Epipaleolithic and the pre-pottery Neolithic. The huge cargo holds are lined with bundles of wattle, tree stems, also lined with clay to act as an early desiccant to prevent moisture from building up in the cargo holds. Another feature is the sloping ramps that lead up and down to the thousands of cages for the different types of animals, and also the perches for the birds. And here there's an archaeobotanical assemblage that is just stunning, representing all the proto and pre-domesticated forms of the cereal grains that comprise the late Epipaleolithic, early Neolithic diet. The site accommodates all the requirements, all the criteria that are mentioned in Genesis, chapters 5 through 10, and also by the Babylonian scholar Berosus. Now that the site has been separated, it was 158 meters when it was together, but is now in an area that covers 2 stadia in width and 5 stadia in length, following the requirements of the Babylonian scholar Berosus. Also, according to Josephus, a Jewish Roman historian, Noah's Ark is braced with cross beams throughout the interior and has plenty of evidence for bitumen on the vessel, which Josephus says is that people took the little bits of bitumen to make little talismans during classical times. The site also fulfills one of the mentions in an account associated with Alexander the Great, in that during the summer, the site is located in the midst of an expanse of water when the glacial ice melts in pools at the bottom of the highest plateau in the southern gorge. Also in the Qur'an, Muhammad mentions the vessel confronted waves as high as mountains. And it's interesting that all along both the starboard and port side, there are ballast features comprising horizontal cypress timbers in front of a linear mass of boulders, but these boulders are from the Levant and comprise sandstone and coral and other sedimentary rock that are totally different from the volcanic lithic material from Greater Mount Ararat. So not only does this site fulfill all the requirements for a maritime barge, but it also fulfills all the requirements in classical archaeology from these ancient texts from Genesis, Berosus, Josephus, Muhammad, and also by a text associated with Alexander the Great. So all of these show very clearly that this archaeological site is Noah's Ark. So let's talk about the top 10 lies that are used by these groups to try to destroy and denigrate the rediscovery of Noah's Ark and inhibit its preservation, its protection, and its research. The second lie that is used to denigrate and destroy Noah's Ark is that Noah's Ark represents a movie set that was constructed by Chinese in order to film a movie. This is totally false. Noah's Ark is located between 3,900 and 4,700 meters above sea level in the southern gorge of Greater Mount Ararat, or Agredagi, under hundreds of tons of ice and lithic boulders. So this site was established in the late Epipaleolithic at the bottom of the gorge, and then covered since 9,600 BC by tons of lithic layers and ice layers. There's no way that anyone could put any of these huge archaeological context under these tons of lithic boulders and ice in order to construct this late Stone Age site. Also, the origins of the structure are from the Levant, the area of Israel, Palestine, Jordan, southern Syria. So not only is the origin ancient, but the carbon dates are ancient and in no way represent a movie site, because it's impossible to put these huge prehistoric structures under the millions of tons of boulders and ice layers. Also, the individuals that are involved are middle-aged Chinese people. In no way do they have the strength to deposit huge wood beams weighing tons under layers of lithic material and ice. In the Öküz Vadisi or the Ox Valley, there's no roads. And also you're fighting going uphill against glacial scree, like climbing a huge sand dune. It's very difficult even with packs. So there's no way people can carry hundreds of tons of wood planks that are all archaeological, that date to thousands of years ago, between 13,100 and 9,600, to access the site. Also, even outside the Öküz Vadisi, there are no roads. The only way you can get up to base camp number 2 is through mules or people carrying backpacks. And again, the entire pathways are rock strewn. And again, the pack animals, the mules, can't get into the Öküz Vadisi to the site, because what is necessary is to either go up the Öküz Vadisi and against the glacial scree moving downward, or over several ridgelines, which the pack animals can't do. So again, there's no access to the site in order to put in huge archaeological loci under millions of tons of rock and ice layers. Also, the area where Noah's Ark is located is in full surveillance of the general public throughout the year, especially in the summer, and by winter skiers. Because the site was in full surveillance by the public, because it was in the Öküz Vadisi, or the southern gorge, Ox Valley, Ahmet Ertuğrul had to take a small group of 6 to 8 people who dug through the post-mold-like tunnels between 4 to 11 meters under the surface of the gorge to access the context from Noah's Ark. First, these usually led to some sort of worship area where individuals from later cultures after the late Epipaleolithic, which was when the Ark first set down on Mount Ararat around 9,600 BC, these worship areas were built near holes that worshipers could peer into the interior of Noah's Ark, but were excluded outside Noah's Ark. Well, Ahmet Ertuğrul and this group of 6 to 8 had to work very fast. They had to work usually in the morning when it was just beginning to be dawn, and then later at night when it was dusk to being very dark. And the issue is that they couldn't be seen by the public. And so that's why Ahmet Ertuğrul needed to fund these 6 to 8 people to dig through the crevices and dig through these post-mold-like tunnels to get to the worship areas that were right outside the entrances to Noah's Ark. So this was not a situation where they were putting anything in. No, they were trying to dig through as fast as possible in the early mornings and in the evening to remove archaeological artifacts from Noah's Ark, an ancient prehistoric barge where different cultures worship God at the Ark soon after the Ark set down in the Öküz Vadisi around 9,600 BC, until 1907, when the Armenian Catholicos Magurtich Crimean ordered the Ark passages filled and artifacts transported to what is now the Republic of Georgia. and for Ertuğrul and his 6 to 8 person group to conduct tours inside the Ark so that, number one, the public wouldn't see them. Number two, the gendarme, the military police, wouldn't see them. And number three, none of Ahmet Ertuğrul's competitors or competing families or clans, Kurdish clans, would see where the location of these tunnels were. So there's no way that anyone could put these huge archaeological contexts under these millions of lithic layers and ice layers, because they would be readily discovered and readily reported to the Turkish authorities. So this is a total lie, but again used to try to denigrate and destroy this precious archaeological site. Ultimately, these lies will be exposed. These individuals that comprise Marxist revolutionaries, devil-worshipping communities, hardcore academic secularists and atheists, and young earth creationists trying to preserve their market share of Ark replicas, will fail. You can cancel people, you can cancel ideas, but you can't cancel a 158-meter barge from the late Epipaleolithic period, buried 4 to 11 meters under the surface of Greater Mount Ararat, between 3,900 and 4,700 meters above sea level. And ultimately, this sign for the ages, as mentioned in the Qur'an, or this sign that represents, just as in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be, the return of God, cannot be hidden, cannot be lied about. My personal aim is to ensure that this site is protected, preserved, researched, and promoted throughout the entire world, and becomes the world's worst kept secret in archaeology. And I hope you do your part to protect, preserve, research, and promote the rediscovery of Noah's Ark, a site that is valuable to 3 world religions, namely Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and represents the transition point between the end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the Holocene, the end of the Stone Age and the beginning of the Farming Age, the end of the Late Epipaleolithic Period and the beginning of the Pre-Pottery Neolithic Period, and the origins of civilization.